If you remember, before we went on the mental health stuff, and because of all the things that have been going on, we were talking about conflict theory and symbolic interactionism. And one of the things that we noted about conflict theory is that because of because of the limited resources we have, the more and more people we have, the more and more this sets up competition and power differences between individuals and groups. Okay. But I wanted to spend some time talking about what is power. When you talk about power, what is it we're talking about when we're talking about a sociological perspective? Okay. So the most common definition of power used in sociology is the possession of authority, influence, and certain skills one has over others. So based on that, there is kind of what we call 5 sources of power. Okay. The first one is legitimate power, or AKA positional power. So this would be, the power of the president of the United States. If you have a supervisor at work, a parent, a judge in a legal situation. All of them are provided with certain powers over others because of their position. And we call it legitimate power because it's power that is agreed upon. So the CEO has a job description. That job description is legitimate according to that corporation and the people who work for that corporation, and they have the decision-making power. Okay. Now, legitimate power doesn't always mean that that person is the brightest, smartest in the room. Okay. That comes out of the second source of power, which is expert power. This is power granted to people because they have a certain amount of knowledge or expertise in something. So, I think about, someone comes and sees me as a psychologist, that provides me with a certain amount of expertise over that individual. Just like when I take my car to the mechanic, they have the ability to make decisions about my car that I definitely don't have that ability to do. Okay. I think one of the issues that we have to delineate when we talk about expert power is sometimes we give people who are not legitimate experts expertise. So if you think about a lot of celebrities, a lot of people will listen to them about global warming or about lack thereof, and they'll give them that expertise power. But that's not expert power. That's more of number 4 and 5, which is referent power and reward power. Referent power is power given to somebody because they're part of some reference group. So celebrity, as an example, is a reference group. Because of their membership to that group, we give them a certain amount of power to persuade what we do, and do, things that they ask of. Reward power is power given because someone has done something unique. Okay, the psychologist who won the Nobel Peace Prize probably has a little bit more power, not a lot more power than what I have in a situation if you wanted to listen to that individual about something else. So reward power is something that is provided because someone has gained some type of notoriety, and then we give them more power over us. Okay. The third one, which I think a lot of people think about when we think about power, is cohesive power. Cohesive power is power over other people because you can threaten them in some way. You could control their behaviors through physical or psychological forces. So You think about a dictator as an example of a country who wasn't voted into that power, but they have power because of the military they have. Some have argued places like the right now Chinese government, I think that, yeah, is a military government. Okay, so their power comes from the fact that they have that military force with them. Okay, cohesive power too. When we could again, we got to bring this down to even individual levels. We can think of people in a toxic or domestic violence relationship. That's a form of cohesive power. Okay, we can think about when we're comparing men and women, and we give one sex more power over something than the other. That's referent power. Okay. And then when you start combining all of these, then you start to build more and more power. Okay. Does that make sense? And it's also important to say, you know, power can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And I think when we have these conversations, we have to remember that in certain situations, even someone who has cohesive power can bring about positive change. Okay. So just some other terminology, power differentials. Okay. This is power differentials occur when there's an unequal distribution about material phenomenon. So when we talk about material phenomenon is we can talk about wealth in a country, those who have wealth and those who don't have wealth. Those who have access to commodities such as oil and gold mines and those kind of things. So land commodities and land ownership. Okay. We can also talk about dialectical materialism, which is the ongoing debate about material phenomenon in the first place. So, you know, we could, if you want to think about dialectical materialism in our country, our government system has liberalism in it and it has conservatism in it. Okay. Liberalism would say that material phenomenon should be equally distributed among a community. Conservatism says no, it needs to be conserved and therefore only to those who can earn it and can produce it. Okay. Both of them what's important about this is neither side is completely wrong or completely right. Okay, there is some sociologists who argue, and I tend to agree with them, that if you don't have a balance between liberal ideas and conservative ideas, that's when you get imbalance within a nation. Okay, you need both sides to be productive in that sense. Okay. Natural power and needs is a capability and needs that humans share with other animals. Okay. So water, air, the ability to communicate with each others, and those types of things. Okay. These are all powers that we share. And where this becomes an issue is when one species starts taking more of the resources than another species. Okay, so we can think about things like, you know, debates over water rights. We could think about what happened when the fence was built through the waterlands on the border and what it did to that. And so those are kind of the conversations that occur when we're talking about natural powers. Okay. Species power and needs are the capabilities and needs that are specific to a species. So for example, one very, well, it's not specific to us, but it's one of the more important ones is humans' needs for social connection. Okay. There's other species that are socially together. We can think of ants is probably one of the closer to our group as far as the need for social connection. But humans literally, and I think I explained this at the beginning of class, humans literally need each other like food and water. If we deny ourselves social connection, our body will actually physically start to deteriorate, okay? The next term is species being, the state of being fully maximized with all natural and species powers and needs met. So this one is kind of the notion of when you're species being, it's kind of that notion that you as a species, as a person, you've maximized your natural resources and your species specific powers, but not to the detriment of other species. So it's kind of that notion of being one with nature while also being completely human at the same time. And then in sociology, when we talk about distortion, we're talking about consequences of specifically capitalism. Capitalism being this notion that competition is a solution to things like homelessness, things like poverty, and all of those types of social wrongs. And when we mean distortion, it really is saying, well, in a pure capitalist system, you have those who have and those who don't have. And there's still the claim that it's a solution to what those don't have. Okay. All right. Alienation then is a form of distortion caused by capitalism, resulting in human species being separated from their species being. Okay, this is when we have such a hardened belief in something, and we can almost include almost anything in here, that we actually make our own living situation even worse. Okay. So this is when we think capitalism is such a solution that people who are using social welfare nets elect individuals who want to take those social welfare nets away, even though they use them to survive. That's an example of alienation. They've been alienated so much into a belief system that they no longer do what's good for their own well-being, their own benefit. And false consciousness is a failure to recognize one's place in social hierarchy because one is alluded to believe they are in control of their own choices or one's own choices. So it's not realizing everything that contributes to our situation because you have such a belief in the social hierarchy system that this must be where I belong. And then we have social class, and that's the place one occupies in the social hierarchy. And there's three general categories of social class. The first one is the very wealthy, the powerful upper class that own and control the means of production. Then we have the middle class, which are the professional workers, small business owners, and lower level management. And then they argue that the third class is the lower class who rely on low-paying wage jobs for their livelihood. Okay? And again, when we go up to like false consciousness, this is when someone in these two classes feel that they have or possess what would be in the next social class. Okay. Do those make sense? I'm okay with this. Okay. And then we have a term known as fetishism of commodities. This is the love of things that money can buy, eventually leading to the love for money itself. And then we have class consciousness, the realization that one's class is an exploited class. So when we talk about that, the lower wage, the third class, those individuals are being paid at such a rate, they can't escape that class. But also they're the ones who are producing the majority of the wealth for especially the first class. So it's an exploitation of that group. I just want to talk about two kind of sub versions of conflict theory. Now that we went through some of these definitions, so we understand what we're talking about when we're talking about conflict and power. The first one is what's known as feminist and critical theory, usually used when issues of gender are predominantly caused or influenced by individuals' lives, such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. But I want to expand on this one because critical theory, they call it cross something or other. Critical theory not only looks at gender differences, but it also is recognizing how ethnicity and culture play a role in the kind of exploitation or the abuse of a given group. So we understand that, if we want to say, who are the ones who have suffered the most, we could definitely look at Black females and Black Native American females. Because when we look at what we have the gender issue that exists within these communities, and then you play in the race issue with it, they tend to become the most exploited class, which is kind of interesting. I worked in the field of domestic violence for a very long time, and I always thought it was interesting that when we look at things like domestic violence within Native American communities, there's no recorded or verbal case of it pre-colonialization. Yes, there was rape and there was sexual assault, there was those things, but that's usually always was when another tribe came into another tribe's community and sexually exploited those women. Again, going back to the feminist critical theory, because it was advantageous for them to do that because then their genes from their tribe would go on. But when we look at intimate partners having violence towards each other, parents, for example, mom and dad, we find very, very little to no evidence that domestic violence existed in the Americas pre-colonialization, okay? And when you look at it, if we had time, we could look into this, but it would take us in 1 month out of our class. If we look at it, it started with the exploitation of Native American communities by white settlers. And then that exploitation and acculturation is where we started to see increased rates of domestic violence. And unfortunately, it has resulted that in some Native American communities, we see the highest rates of domestic violence now, okay? And this is what feminist and critical race theory and critical theory is really trying to weed out, okay? What are the elements that contribute to a group that is taken advantage of, okay? Why does it exist in the first place? And a lot of the feminists in this area and critical theories say, because when we go back to who has the natural power in a gender relationship, well, there's only one person there that can actually give birth to a child and is life-giving. And so that really, in a natural power setting, puts the female partner in a gendered relationship with the natural power within that relationship. And what a lot of the feminist and critical theories people state is it's that need to take away that power that has led to things like male domination, domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, if that makes sense. And then we have another theory here that kind of goes along with it called crisis theory. And this is usually this is used when working with individuals who are in a crisis and experience severe depletion of personal power, such as in a victimization type of situation. I'm going to leave that explanation at that point because I think there's a better explanation that we could use an example of here in just a few minutes. Okay. So again, feminist theories using the basic tenets of conflict theory. Feminists believe oppression and inequality is rooted in gender and gender inequality. This is including equality towards other races and ethnicity. This is now called critical race theory. They've kind of taken the feminist out of it in a lot of current literature. Critical theory is aimed to wake. I can't talk all of a sudden. I was trying to read it. That's the scary part. Critical theory, its aim is to try and bring to light these inequality differences, especially between gender and races, and to state what are the attitudes and beliefs that drive them. And we find they're not based on rational thought processing, but rather by social forces, which has the goal to maintain power for some, and the rest lead to believe that it is justified and needed, and they play a critical role in that social success. So between the two theories, they're trying to explain what are the sources of inequality, but then because it's not legitimate, what are the social forces that continue to drive these power differences between people? Okay. And again, I'll use this term here. When we're looking at critical theory, it's really an attempt to address the structural issues that create inequality. So some other terminology that can be used in this is systematic racism would fall under the structural issue, okay? Those types of systems that are in place that continue the promotion of things like racist thoughts and attitudes. But what critical theory is going to maintain is all of that is one fictitious, but it's there to maintain the power differentials within a given society or within a given community. And there's an interesting book that Sigmund Freud actually wrote that's called Civilizations and Its Discontent. I just want to bring this up right here at this moment, because what he argues in this book is that people at your natural state, in our natural being, would take advantage of each other, would be aggressive towards each other. Remember Freud, if you've taken the Psych 101 class, Freud believed that we were all driven by two unconscious drives, and that's aggression and sex, life and death. And those are in constant conflict with each other. And so man, according to Freud, said civilization was created to squash down humans' natural aggression, to put it in check, as you would say. Okay, and what individuals are most likely to need the most guidance, according to Freud, women, because according to him, men really don't have mental disorders, women do. Okay. So, but the reason why I bring this up at this point is it's a lot of what he wrote in the Civilization Discontent, which justifies police forces, justifies court systems, because all of those are established to squash aggression in a community. This is where you're going to see law enforcement being used not as someone who goes and arrests the bad guys, but they're going to go in any type of situation in, today, military garb, and squash any type of what looks like a rebellion to that community. Okay, so I bring this up because it was kind of an important turning point, because after this was translated into English, this is where you're going to see increases in lynchings here in the United States. This is where you're going to see the pictures when it comes to the 1960s of police officers spraying what were peaceful protesters. This is where you see some of the things that we saw over the pandemic with the different riots and those types of things. It's really was based on this idea that the government has the responsibility to keep people in their place. So, how Black people shouldn't have a voice. So we got to repress that. Okay. Women should make sure that if we look at, I find it fascinating. Women are being more successful than men right now in the United States. Y'all graduating from high school more, you're going to college more women are graduating with graduate degrees. More women are running for public office, but there is still this thing of, I hear it all the time, well, what about the men? What are they losing? Is it women just taking over now? And it's like, isn't that the wrong conversation we should be having? Shouldn't we say, why aren't they being successful? Because they're having the lowest graduation rates in history right at this moment, the lowest entrance into colleges and universities. I think right now, TOCC has 68% female, and then the rest are male or non-binary. If we think about this idea, but then you think about how our culture still treats who are becoming the most powerful parts of our country. It's kind of an odd thing that is occurring. I'm curious what you guys will do about it. Kick some butt. Some sub-theories, again, of conflict theory. We talked about a little bit about feminism. We should note that probably the one person who really was one of the driving forces was Chavez, 1941. She died in 2006. And she was really one of the first to say some important things about gender and race. She stated here in the United States, especially, there are two sources of inequality that are fictitious because they don't exist in reality if we make them up. Okay, one is gender and the other is race. And that institutional power maintains both types of this inequality. And that feminist theory has advanced equality between genders, but not without its side effects. If you feminists have had a hard time really getting their message across. Okay. When we ask a lot of people, do you consider yourself feminist? And do you know what feminism is? A lot of times in the general population, there's a misunderstanding of what feminism is. And so there's an instant denial that they're part of that. Usually the attitudes that we have about feminists were those who were promoted by the men and the men in power about these women who are trying to take control. And feminism, though, is just the belief that the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes and social movements organized around that belief. And if we look here in the United States, we can see that there are three historical waves within the feminist movement. But first, let me define matriarchy versus patriarchy. Matriarchy is when a society or any social group or institution is dominated by women, okay? And some have asked, is there matriarchy in US society? Well, we can look at certain times of our past and say, yes, matriarchy has existed here in the United States. An example are the Navajo, where the women were actually the landowners. And for men to have a place, they would have to go ask the women to stay on their land in exchange for work or whatever it may be. We can also look along the Canadian and Alaskan coast, where fishing was a big thing, but the women actually owned the fishing boats. And the men had to go and ask the women to work for them. Okay, so we do see, and there are different matriarchies that's still around. These are the ones that we know about here in the Americas, and there's other examples elsewhere. But matriarchy has existed in many paths that we can see. Patriarchy is when a society or any social group or institution is dominated by men, and men make the decisions. And yes, we could say that especially the westernized European version of America is very patriarchal. We can look at some of our South American counterparts. We can look at Mexico and states like those, and they're very patriarchal focused. Okay. But this is just when a society is dominated by men versus women. So we have matriarchy versus patriarchy. And this is just a small kind of way that we even among women, we can judge others based on, this person says this person exists in a cruel male-dominated culture, but this individual also feels like that person is too. So again, we got to look at how culture plays a role in our views of each other, even as men and women, or women and other women. So historical roots, so social change, women's rights achieved and continued through collective action and include social movements. So this is where we're going to talk about the three waves of the women's right movement, okay? The first wave, which of course is the earliest period of feminist activism, and included a period from about the mid-19th century, so 1850s, and until American women won the right to vote in 1920. This first wave is called the women's suffrage movement because the organizers and the individuals who were part of this movement felt like they were pretty much slaves, because remember, Black people didn't have the right to vote at this period of time too, and so they felt like they were just another version of slavery. So they were going through suffrage. And again, if we look back, a marriage license was the passage of ownership from the father to the husband. Way back when, even here in the 1850s, you didn't go to the municipal court or the family court to get your marriage license. You went to the same place you'd get your car licensed. And that's where you would get your license for marriage, okay? So there's a lot of evidence that it is true that this was a true suffrage movement. in trying to gain the rights of individualism, individual rights through the right to vote. Okay. And then after that, it would take another, 50 years in order to gain rights over even your own body and stuff like this, because it was still clear up into the 1960s in many states where a woman could not go to a doctor and get treatment without the permission of her husband. That really started waning down in the 1970s. But then, and what helped that movement was the Roe versus Wade decision, which gave women the right over their body. Okay. But as we can see today, there's changes in that movement as well. There's decisions about that movement that we'll address a little bit later in the course. So this is what the first wave was really about, was just to gain some of the basic rights that American men were granted at the same period. The second wave was between the 1960s and 1970s, and this was a goal of women achieving equal access to employment and education. Okay. Now, it's during this period where feminists start to get a reputation, okay, about them being, wannabe men or dykes or those kinds of things. And only butches go to be a feminist. Because one of the kind of mistakes, I feel it was a mistake, is that in order for women to have equal employment and education rights, women need to be like men. And so in this movement, there was a want to, I have to have a power like a man. I have to act like a man. I have to be like a man in order to gain equal employment and education rights. So a lot of the stereotypes about what a feminist is comes out of this second wave. Okay, but they did make some gains for women, such as equal access to education through Pell Grant and school loan systems. They did start the notion that a mom can have a career and be a mom. They did start to break down some of the power. This is where we start to see at least a few women become into major leadership roles. And so the criticism was the notion of what women in this movement felt like they needed to do in order to have equal rights to men. And in this movement, it was very much about, well, we have to be like men. Okay. The third wave, though, which is our most recent, focuses on two things. One is the diversity, that no two women, no two men, no women are the same. We all have our own different experiences. We bring our own thing to it, and the variety of identities that women can possess. Okay. And what probably makes this movement different than the last one is that the focus isn't about trying to be something else. It's about the realization that just being human, you have talents, you have abilities. You don't have to be like this in order to get this. So be male in order to get power and money and wealth. No, this movement focuses very much on the innate abilities of each individual and each woman. And so when you look at even when you look at a lot of the literature, we talk about, leadership styles of women versus men, instead of saying, well, men are better leaders than women because of X, Y, and Z. We don't talk about that anymore. We usually say, overall, these are qualities of female leaders. and they can run a company based on those leadership qualities. Here are the leadership qualities of a man, and based at, as long as they're positive leadership qualities, okay, they can also run a business and do those kinds of things. So the thing about the third, I feel about third wave feminism is it's about regaining a sense of identity about what being a female is, okay? And we're also going to see in this movement respect for those who don't meet those specific niches of that gender. So we're going to start talking about non-binary individuals, which are individuals who don't claim to be male or female. We're going to start promoting different sexualities and race and ethnic identifications. So that really is kind of this marking point of really understanding that we all bring something of quality to a situation. Now, we do have to say that, you know, men didn't just sit there and have women come and say, well, we want rights and everything. I do have to note that there was a lot of cultural backlash, and I think that there still is against feminism. In fact, we know in the 1970s, there was what was called the male liberation movement, which was about discussing these challenges to men's masculinity and the purpose of a man. And of course, in their conclusion, they're going to conclude men should still be in charge of the family, in charge of work and those kinds of things, because that's every society needs masculinity in it to survive. And this led to two interesting movements. So you have the men's right movement, which is a group of men who feel feminism has created disadvantages for men. It's a special group. And then there's the pro-feminist men movement. These are men who act as allies to the feminist movement. So even among men, you can see some react viscerally, feeling like there's a threat to what it means to be a man because of these women wanting rights and work. But then we also see there's a pro-feminist men's movement that does see that sexism harms both men and women in the end. And that there should be a fundamental change of ideas about gender and those kinds of things. And so, what do we think of when we are first asked, tell me about you? And usually there's a couple places that we start, right? Well, we can think about our gender. Well, sometimes we'll say, I'm a white guy, social position, parent, student, professor, place, Autumn Nation, sales, Tucson, Arizona, America. Relationship, we might say, well, I'm married to, or my parents are these individuals from this community. Sometimes, but less, we think of age, looks, and religion. But that's least common that we look at. So let's look at each one of these different classes of when we think about ourselves, about each one of these. And we'll start with gender. It's the gender talk. First of all, I want to start with what is the origins of the word gender? Well, we need to separate the term sex from the term gender, okay? Because believe it or not, the original word gender was originally a medical term that defined someone who has some physical abnormality that it wasn't possible to classify them as male or female. So a tumor or something like that just created it so it wasn't possible to identify that person as male or female. That's the original use of the term gender. It wasn't until the 1970s when feminist researchers came around and said, you know what? We need to differentiate what is meant by sex, which is the biological differences between males and females. Males having external genitalia, females having internal genitalia. And then there's a secondary biological sex characteristics, okay? They argued this needs to be separated from the psychological and social differences between genders, between males and females. So when we think about gender, we usually use terms like man, woman. When we think about sex, we're usually using terms like male, female, okay? So again, it's about a separation about what it means to be womanish or male-ish and the biological determinants, okay? And that has led to our traditional assumption about gender, which is the dichotic approach, that there's men, women, and you're either one or the other. There's religious debates behind this. There's social debates behind this, excuse me. And we will see that, well, we'll take a look at it here in just a minute, okay? But I want to talk about what we know from more sociology, science, biology, because what we see in the broader world is if we put male right here, biological male meaning a full biological panel, I mean, talking testosterone, all of those things. And then over here, we have completely, totally female, where we have hormone panel that is completely estrogen based and those types of things, okay? What we actually end up with is what's called a bimodal distribution. That yes, for a good number of individuals, they're in the male, more the male side of the distribution, and for a good portion of the population, a good majority is on the female side of the distribution. But I would just make this comment right here. When we look at biology, there is no such thing as 100% male or 100% female, because both genders will have a mixture of the hormones that make what would be a female versus a male. And in fact, when we're first conceived, we're all conceived female. It's not until about the 6 weeks of a gestation where if you have the Y chromosome, I think it is that a dude one, right? It will send androgens. It's kind of a bumped up version of testosterone over the fetus, which will make it so that instead of the genitalia developing inward, it starts to develop outwards. The what would be the ovaries become the testicles. What becomes a vaginal shaft then becomes the penis of the male. But we're all actually conceived female originally. Okay. And then there is a population of individuals that is born with about the same mixture of male and female hormones and everything, that they can actually develop both internal and external genitalia. And so these individuals are truly kind of both male and female when we look at it from a biological perspective, okay? And this distribution makes sense in a lot of ways, because we need a good number of males and females to repopulate the earth. And so from a biological perspective, this makes a lot of sense, right? But let's take a look though at some other categories. So again, we have male and then we have female, okay? But then we look at the gender aspect of it. And yes, the majority of males who are born male will take on a male man gender identity. And a good number of the females will take on a woman gender identity, okay? Just looking at how the population distribution really works, okay? But when we really look at it, we're not always on that side of our gender identity, okay? I know when my granddaughter comes up and wants to paint my nails, I'm gonna have my nails painted. They were pink last week. There's still some there. I know when she wants to play dolls, I'm playing dolls. Okay, just like with my grandson, with my wife, if he wants to play, he's into the little lightsabers right now, and my wife will do the lightsabers. Okay, and so we're not always compliant to our gender identity, as I guess my point. Okay. And we also know that there's also groupings between these two gender identities that there's different groups. So we have individuals who are transgender. These are individuals who feel like, let's say they were born biologically male, but they feel very woman and female inside. Okay. I've had some good friends and I've worked with some transgendered people, and they all explain it's like that they're trapped inside the wrong body, is the way it's often been described. We know that among a lot of Native American communities, there's the regaining sense of what's called individuals who are two-spirited. Okay. Until in quite a few Native American communities, until Westernization and colonialization, people who had both the essence of a man and a woman were given actually high status within many tribes. Okay, why? Well, there was some benefits to this, right? Because in those gendered situations, if you have a person who's very masculine as well as female, they could do a lot of carrying around of stuff. But also in the context, if you have the essence of both a man and a woman, that will give you a special, unique perspective when someone is having a problem. You're not just going to look at it from a male perspective or a female perspective. You're going to be looking at it from both. So a lot of times they were given positions of advisors or the like. That was, of course, ruined with colonialism and those kinds of things. But we've seen in the last, I think it's been 40 years. I know, about 43, 45 now, that a lot of Native American communities, which had individuals like this as status, are trying to revive that back. Okay. A genderqueer is someone who takes their gender identity to an extreme. Okay, probably the ones that come to mind are individuals who the very stereotypical gay male, or very stereotypical female. But the thing that is interesting, and I've never got one of my students to ask this, is when we look at genderqueer, and it is the extreme version of your gender, I've always wanted someone to go up to the biggest, brawliest masculine man and go, "Do you know you're a genderqueer?" I've always wondered what would happen. Just don't tell anyone I asked you to do it. But anyway, so genderqueer is an expression of extremes on being man or woman. Gender expression, and this is something that goes back to what we just talked about. So we have men, man, masculine, female, woman, feminist. When we talk about masculinity, we're usually talking about domination. We're talking about authority, those types of things. Feminism, feminine is more caretaking in those types of roles, more nurturing type of expression. And then as I expressed in the last one, masculine men don't always act masculine, and feminine women don't always act feminine. And then there are people who are in between, who are what we call androgynous. This is individuals who neither act masculine nor feminine. They dress, or they are comfortable with who they are, that they don't really take on a gender role or a gender expression. And then when we go down the line again, we know that, many male men will have a sexual orientation towards women. And if we go down this line, many females, based on population distribution, will have a sexual orientation towards men. And this is who we are attracted to, both sexually and emotionally. Okay. And then if we look in between again, we get some different ones, which we'll look at more here in just a minute. We have things like bisexual and pansexual. Okay. Bisexual is when a person does have a primary sexual orientation, but will also have some sexual attractions towards their opposite. Okay. And that's a misnomer about bisexual people, is that they just go either way. They actually do have a primary attraction, but then can find themselves sexually attracted to their opposite. Okay. Pansexual is more what people would have thought with the bisexual. Pansexual, if you think of pan, all inclusive, these are individuals who have really no basic sexual orientation towards another individuals. They'll have sexual attractions to just many people. Some of the research that has come out is suggesting that maybe these individuals are more attracted towards personality qualities than they are towards a person's quote unquote sex or gender. So that's what some of the research right now is suggesting. All right. And then we have, just like we have expression of identity, we have expression of behavior, and this is physical action. So who do we have sex with? And again, you look down this side, but there's some interesting things about sexual behavior, because just like we don't always act masculine or feminine or those types of things, we also know that sexual behaviors can change very much as well. We know for specifically, when human beings are put in captivity and they don't have a high amount of selection in who they can have sex with, they'll have sex with anyone. But we find this with any species. We put two male monkeys in a cage, they're eventually going to have sex with each other, because of that's all that's selected. But we also know that it goes well beyond that. So I wouldn't call him a colleague anymore, but I had an individual in graduate school who was doing his dissertation. There's some pretty weird dissertations out there. But he was doing his dissertation on, back then on Craigslist, they used to have personal ads. Okay. And he was specifically looking at men seeking men. Okay. Because there was a lot of them. And he's like, the number of male seeking male ads outnumber the percentage of gay men within a given community. And so he was very curious, what's going on here? Is it bots? Is it, something fluky going on? But he actually went and contacted these men and said, okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a researcher, blah, blah, blah. All your information will be confidential, all those kinds of things. Can you tell me why are you on this dating site or this personal ad site? And what was it? Don't quote me on this, somewhere between 80 to 90%. I just can't remember. I think it's on the high end of the 80%. Men were considered themselves straight. So they claimed that they had a orientation towards women, but they were seeking out sexual relationships with other men. And it was, I don't know why I remember this one, 76% of them were actually in an intimate relationship with a female partner, whether it be they were married or they were dating or they were engaged. Okay. So when we do look at this, and then when we look on the female end of things, we know that at least on an unconscious level, women can be attracted to other women. We've done research on showing women pictures of other women and measuring pure physiological responses. And we find that about 75% of women will have a physiological sexual response to pictures of attractive women, even though they state in their thing that their sexual orientation is towards men. So again, behaviors don't always meet what we think people do within the community or within their claimed orientation. Okay, so I think what this slide does for us is it brings out the complexity of the issue of human sexuality and gender issues, because you really can't say that there's a pure one or the other. Okay. All right. Then we can look at different orientations. And I'm just going to ask you all, does anybody have any questions about any of these? There's two that I want to cover. I want to cover asexual and I want to cover cisgender. But is there any of these other terms that you all are not familiar with or want to know about? I'm finding as I've given these lectures over the last 13 years, there's less and less questions about these. So I think maybe I'm getting old. All right, I did just want to explain to you cisgender and asexual. Cisgender is an individual who believes that the only type of sexual orientation one should have is a male towards a female and a female towards a male, and that anything beyond that deviates. Okay. This term was added because if you really look at research on human sexuality, I want to suggest looking at anything before 2012, because the sources of research was being paid for by more special interest groups. They were looking for a certain answer. But after 2012, the federal government actually released research monies to start researching it without any special interest being involved. And one of the things that they quickly realized is that everything was being compared towards this traditional group that we actually didn't know much about. We just knew that they like girls, the girls like the guys, and they felt that that was the only way it was, which makes a very poor research comparison group when you're comparing two groups with each other. So this provided this, instead of saying that human sexuality is about men and women, this is saying that there's a group of individuals who believe that, if that makes sense. And then the other one that, and we'll end with this today, is asexual, okay? We all will go through a period in our life. Every human will go through a period of life where sex is just not your thing. You don't want it. You're almost kind of repulsed by it. But there is a group of people who they are asexual, meaning that they really never have any sexual desire or orientation towards sexuality. And you know, we've studied these individuals and we've looked at them very closely. There's nothing wrong biologically. There's nothing historically wrong with them by their social cultural upbringing. It's just there is a subset of the population who do not want anything to do with human sexuality, and that's okay. The reason why I bring this up is when I worked at the behavioral health center at another college, I would get individuals in, it was usually almost always women who were at the point of suicide, severe depression, severe things, because when you get to college, guess what they do in a lot of dorm rooms? I hope it doesn't happen here, but you get pressured into talking about sexuality, expression sexuality, having sex. And there's a lot of pressure on a lot of individuals to do that. And unfortunately, what it leads some people to do is to either go act on that when they don't want it, or to have it be forced on them. Okay. And I have worked with a lot of asexual individuals, and I just want to put this out there. If you have someone in your life and they don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they have no interest in a boyfriend or girlfriend, don't ask what's wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly fine and they're living their life how they want to. And it's very inappropriate for us to put pressure on these individuals to be something they're not. So I just wanted to bring that up because of my clinical experience in working with individuals and gender issues. So, but we are almost out of time. So do you have any questions? Good. All right, let's get out of here for today, and we will see you all on Wednesday.